I talked to the folks who were here earlier. How many of our new arrivals, you guys ski? Snowboard? Snowshoe? What did you think I was going to say?
Well, you know everything starting with snow.
Snow. Snowball fight? Snowmobile. Yeah, all right. So know before you go, this program, basic avalanche education, and it's pretty much for everybody, no matter what we do. And as I stated earlier, I've been working with snow and avalanches for the past 26, 27 years. I'm not an avalanche expert, but I can get in the mountains every day. I can have a great time. I can ride powder. And I get to come home at night to my family. And I think that's the most important thing. How are we looking there, Trent? Ready to roll. So, and I guess I'm supposed to sort of stay in one place and not move around too much, which is really not my style. So please bear with me. Yeah, know before you go. When are most avalanches happening? They're happening in weather like this. It's snowing, it's blowing. You can hardly see 100 feet in front of us. But you know, interestingly enough, most avalanche accidents, they're happening on days like this. It's sunny. The sun makes us feel really good in the winter. And as such, we're out with our friends. We're loving the fresh pow. And the sign flips open at the resorts. I mean, now skiing and riding, you know, in powder becomes a high competition sport. No matter what we're doing in the backcountry, usually what happens is we get into steeper and steeper, more avalanche-prone terrain, no matter how we're getting there, whether it's skis, boards, snowshoes, snowmobiles. Oftentimes, it's the same. It's a sunny day, and we start climbing or riding in steeper terrain. And unfortunately, the avalanche doesn't know that we're a hot rider or that there's other tracks on the slope. All the avalanche knows is that we find a weakness in the snowpack, we collapse the snow, and now we're staring down the barrel of a very dangerous slide. And if we're up on a ridge like this and we're able to trigger an avalanche, you know, this is a pretty safe place to be. You can see how these slabs shatter like a pane of glass. But if we're a turn or two into this, or if we're climbing up the slope on our snowmobiles and we trigger a slide, now it's a much different story. You know what happens generally is that we get caught in the slide. We're tumbling down the mountain. We don't know which way is up. We don't know which way is down. Maybe if we're on a snowmobile, we grab a fistful of throttle. If we're on our skis or our boards, we can jet off of this. But what happens is we realize very quickly, avalanches go 0 to 40 miles an hour in just a second or two. We're tumbling down the mountain. Boom, lights out. At the bottom of this, we can't even move our little fingers because avalanche debris sets up like concrete in a second or two. I don't spring out of this. I don't go over to my friends and high-five them and say, dude, was that sick or what? It doesn't work that way. Now, you're my rescue party. And this is going to be like the most stressful thing in the world, looking for my friend, looking for a loved one underneath the snow. The hardest job, though, is not finding them with the beacon. It's digging through all of this concrete-like snow. If we look at statistics, how long do we have to live under the snow? About 15 minutes, if we haven't been killed by trauma. A quarter of us are beaten to death. Avalanches are very violent events. In the time continuum here, as we get into this about 30, 35 minutes, you can see that our chances of being found alive, they catastrophically drop. And 2 hours into this, it's going to be very hard to find somebody alive. At the basic minimum, we need an avalanche beacon, a probe, and a shovel. If we're headed into the backcountry, that is the basics that we need. You know, there's some great technologies out there right now. These avalanche airbags, what you do is as you're getting caught in the slide, you pull on a ripcord and this big burly balloon comes up and it'll keep you on top of the snow. Unfortunately, the Achilles heel with these is that if I slam into trees at 40 miles an hour, it doesn't matter that I have the avalanche airbag. If I'm caught in what we call a terrain trap, a gully, and I'm buried deeply, the avalanche airbag isn't going to help me out much at all. So avalanche avoidance is really the big ticket item. Of course, Avalungs. This is a device that as I'm getting tumbled around in the slide, I can put this in my mouth, and it helps actually to disperse CO2 away from me, and I can breathe in oxygen. But again, we've been buried. The thing that we've got to think about is avoidance and not getting buried at all. We've got the gear, we've got to practice with it, and you've got to practice often, just like anything else in life. So it's great. Here in Utah, we've got a number of different beacon parks that you can go to. Any place that you visit across the West, go into your local avalanche advisory on the web, figure out where these are. Here in Utah, we've got 5 of them. And they're great resources. Practice and practice often. I mean, that is really the ticket. Hopefully, with all of this practice, you know, even if we do mess up, we'll integrate all of our rescue gear, all of our knowledge, and hopefully the outcome is good at the end of the day. It doesn't have to be a ginormous avalanche like this to kill us. Even something small, if we're buried under the snow, then we've got to call in an outside rescue if we don't have the gear. And remember, it's going to take these resources a long time to get to where we're at. The first thing they're going to do is assess the scene and make sure that they're not becoming part of the accident. So you'll also see that in a lot of clothing now, there's a Reco chip that's embedded. You do need an outside rescue if you're wearing a Reco chip. This does not replace an avalanche beacon, but it does help to facilitate finding that on your clothing. So, you know, it's another great resource, but again, you've got to have an avalanche beacon, a shovel, and a probe if you're headed into the backcountry. Of course, avalanche rescue dogs. We see them inside the ski resort boundaries, and rescue dogs are very fast. They're very efficient finding somebody underneath the snow. But again, it's going to take a long time to get these resources to where we're at. And, you know, oftentimes when we call in an outside rescue, the outcome is not going to be a good outcome. Statistics are going to be stacked against us when the clock is ticking and we're making phone calls to bring in other resources. It's just not a good thing. We've got to be prepared for our own rescue. Of course, you can't just go to a ridge and call 911 and expect the cavalry to arrive. Yeah, it might work that way in the movies, but in real life, what happens in the mountains? Weather's always changing. Cloud decks are lowering, it starts to snow, and now a helicopter isn't going to fly in that kind of weather. As a matter of fact, helicopters crash in that kind of weather. Who's triggering avalanches? Well, it's us. About 90% of all avalanche accidents, we're the ones that trigger the avalanche that maybe catches, carries, and possibly kills us. So if we look at that, are we going to be triggering avalanches in terrain like this? No, of course not. Not with ski lifts and moguls and other skiers all around. Where we're going to be triggering avalanches is in the backcountry, the other side of the rope line. And in about 99% of all avalanche accidents, they occur in the backcountry. So that's kind of the good news, because what we've got going on inside the resorts is hardworking men and women. Every time it snows or the wind blows or there's temperature changes, they're doing avalanche reduction work. They're making it safe inside the ski resort boundaries. If we're headed out on our sleds, unfortunately, there's nobody throwing bombs for us. So on elevated avalanche danger days, we just hang out on low-angle terrain. That's one of the advantages that skiers and boarders have over us when we're headed out on our sleds. So the first thing I want to know, if I'm going in the backcountry, what does avalanche terrain look like? And as a group, what do you think? Does this look like avalanche terrain, everybody? Yeah, pretty classic. Steep, gnarly, no trees. That looks pretty daunting to me. Right here in your face, Mount Timpanogos. Yeah, steep, gnarly. That looks like avalanche terrain to me. But you know, avalanche terrain can be deceptive. This looks like something maybe I'd take the dog for a walk. You know, maybe go up this little gully here and, wow, look at this. I go up the gully, I trigger an avalanche, and it doesn't have to be a very deep avalanche to bury me deeply in what we call a terrain trap, in a gully. So looking at our terrain, the most important thing, of course, is slope steepness. Slopes that are less steep than about 30 degrees, there isn't a gravitational tug on the snowpack. Generally, we're pretty safe in that kind of terrain. Steeper than 50 degrees, snow's always sliding. We don't develop a cohesive slab, that piece of snow that's going to shatter like a pane of glass around us. That happens right here in the middle, 35 to 45 degrees. That's also where the most fun riding is as well. The next thing I want to look at is what's holding the snow in place. Are there any trees? Are there any anchors? And I look at this slope right here, man, it's wide open. That's not going to be the kind of day that I'm going to be charging down the slope or riding up it on my sled when the avalanche danger is elevated. I'm going to want to be over here in the trees, or if things are really sketchy, I'm going to want to be over here where the trees are tight. Something to think about trees, though. If we can ride or slide through trees, avalanches can go through trees. And now those nice friendly trees with the fluffy snow, the trees become our worst enemy. They become baseball bats as I hit them at 40 miles an hour. So I've got to think about the consequences. I've got to think about the consequences of slamming into the baseball bats, or even if I trigger a small avalanche and a cliff band like this and bonk my head on a rock, man, I'm going to be toast, right? So I've got to think about the consequences of maybe going over. If we trigger an avalanche in these steep gully walls, I could be buried very deeply. So what am I going to be looking at? I'm going to be looking at all these different terrain components. And most importantly, if I'm riding down any type of terrain that is chute-like or dumps into a deep river or a creek bed, this is going to be an unsurvivable slide. So looking at my terrain, especially if I'm building a kicker or a jump, I want to think not only about the terrain I'm jumping into, but also the terrain that's surrounding me. I want to avoid avalanche terrain, especially when I'm in the backcountry, maybe I'm out for a photo shoot or something along those lines. This is a perfect example of a nice little opening in the trees. I build a big jump, and now I can just have my way. Grab a fistful of throttle, get some big air, and get after it. So with my terrain checklist, what am I looking at? I'm looking at slope steepness. Any slope that's between 35 and 45 degrees, I'm in avalanche terrain. My anchors, what's holding the snow in place? And then finally, like anything in life, what are the consequences to my decision making? The most complicated thing that we do in the avalanche forecast business is we look at these layers of snow. We look at the snowpack. And basically what I look at is strong snow on weak snow. If I've got this very dense wind-driven snow on weak sugary snow or light fluffy snow, it's a bad combination. And remember, we develop these layers of snow throughout the year through different storm events. Some come in light and fluffy, others have wind, others are going to get dry overnight. And the thing I don't realize when I'm walking around is really what I'm walking on. So what I've got to do is I've got to investigate these layers. And sometimes as I do, I'll notice a very dangerous setup like this. Strong snow on weak snow. This is from 2 years ago. You can see how dense the one layer of snow is, and I go in there and I grab this other layer of snow. It's very weak. It's very sugary. Bad combination. I'm no science guy, though. I want to look at obvious clues that I can really sink my teeth into, and the biggest clue to avalanches is, well, it's avalanches. If I'm seeing recent avalanches on the same kinds of slopes I want to ride on, they face the same way, they're the same slope angle, same elevation, well, there's a problem. I'm going to have to rethink my travel plans. Maybe I'm headed up a road here and I see this gigantic pile of snow out on the road, all of this heavy equipment moving the snow off the road. Yeah, I know that there's going to be an issue, especially if I want to get into some steep, gnarly terrain. So recent avalanches, that's going to be the biggest red flag. I'm going to go through a couple more. Another big red flag, maybe I'm breaking trail and I take a step or two and I hear the snowpack go, whoomph. Has anybody here ever heard the snowpack go whoomph? Yeah, it scares the heck out of you. Strong snow on weak snow. You'll hear that whoomping, that collapsing, and oftentimes you'll see shooting cracks around you. Another big red flag. You know, maybe as my partner is out on his split board, he can see these cracks shooting out in front of him. Safe thing here is that this slope isn't steep enough to avalanche, but it's a really good indicator that there's some pretty sketchy conditions out there. Remember, strong winds, man, they can move snow 10 times faster than the heaviest snow falling straight out of the sky. And, you know, as I look here, you can see how the wind has been blowing snow from the right to the left, stripping all of this snow off the windward side of the mountain, depositing it on the leeward side of the mountain. And it doesn't take a whole lot of snow to blow this, a whole lot of wind to blow this light, fluffy snow around. The higher in elevation we go, generally, the stronger the winds are. And what does Bob Dylan say? He says, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. Yeah, subterranean homesick blues. I can just look outside my hotel room here at Valdez, Alaska, and I know, man, the wind is smoking up high. It's going to create very dangerous avalanche conditions. And of course, as I head out to my rig in the morning, if I'm hip deep in snow with a big cornice hanging over my head, I know that, number one, it's going to be a white knuckle drive even getting to where I want to ride. And then once I get there, the snow is going to get super sensitive, super cranky, and there's going to be avalanches everywhere. You know, maybe I take a break while I'm out skiing and I get back to my skis and it's like, wow, the weather changed. There's all of this snow. Snow's like people, it doesn't like rapid change. When it goes through a rapid change, it gets cranky. It changes the avalanche conditions. That could be wind, that could be snow, or it could be rising temperatures. Especially as we segue more into the spring-like period, oftentimes we'll see rising temperatures and you see these roller balls cascading down the hill. The final red flag is, what's the avalanche danger? You know, if I start off here on a scale of 1 to 5, and I'm in the category 1, 2, low to moderate danger, I'm going to need basic avalanche skills. As I get into this category 3, considerable danger, you know, this is where I've got to start to have expert avalanche skills. And when it's high and extreme, these are the days that we definitely want to be inside the ski resort boundaries. I mean, it could just be an epic day of resort riding. Most avalanche accidents, they're happening right here under a considerable danger rating. Level 3 on a scale of 1 to 5. And again, those level 4 and 5, yeah, we're definitely not getting out into the backcountry. I look at my 5 red flags. Recent avalanches. Biggest clue to avalanches is avalanches. And then I'm going to be wanting to be aware of cracking and collapsing of the snow. Certainly strong winds and heavy snow. And then is there a recent thaw? Finally, what's the danger rating? And also we always want to think about the consequences. Am I going to get buried deep in a gully? Am I going to get slammed into the baseball bats? Or am I going to get carried over a cliff? All terrible consequences. So how do we travel around in the backcountry safely? If nothing else, only put one person on the slope at a time. You know, if I've got more than one person on the slope at a time and we trigger an avalanche and my partner's buried and I don't see where he's at, it's going to complicate the rescue. As we're heading across suspect avalanche terrain, spread out. Keep an eye on your partner. And then finally, cornices tend to be super unpredictable in the mountains. We want to look to see what's over on the other side. And what can happen with cornices is that they either break with us or they break behind us. And, you know, being the curious beings that we are, we're drawn to the other side, of course. Once that breaks, we could trigger an avalanche as we both slam on top of the snow below. So cornices tend to be super tricky animals. You're headed into the backcountry, you got to go to your one-stop shop for all things avalanche. Visit your local avalanche advisory. Don't start the day like this guy. Yeah, me as a little kid sort of experimenting. We definitely don't want to start the day like this guy. We want to start here. Get as much information as you can. You can make educated decisions. You can be out in the mountains every day, and you can rock like these guys at the end of the day. Yeah, of course, we've all made some questionable decisions in the past. But as we continue in this journey together, remember that the avalanche doesn't know we're a local or a hot rider or it's the best powder day all year, and avalanches don't know that we've got to get home. So I'm going to open it up to you in question and answer. And now I can move, right? So any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you just kind of walk through when you're talking about a thaw, what happens with the snow and why that causes an avalanche?
Yeah, so let's talk about, a thaw and also rapidly warming temperatures. So first off, we're probably not in that thaw period right now, but definitely the sun is getting stronger. And as we rise the temperatures rapidly, remember, the snow does not like rapid change. So what will happen with rapidly rising temperatures is the surface snow will start to consolidate and it will become much more of a slab. It'll become more of that cohesive piece of snow.